When the first trailer for Sonic Superstars released, people were really excited to see a Sonic game have 4-player co-op for the first time, and then immediately disappointed when it was local only. After release, the criticism made a lot more sense. Co-op in Sonic games has never been the best, from letting your little brother control Tails and run off screen to only 1 of 4 people being able to play the game. Let's go through all of Sonic's co-op adventures and see how it's possible for Sonic Team to make it good. Sonic 2 was the first game to implement co-op in the series. When playing normally, you control Sonic while Tails copies most of your actions, but when another controller is connected, that second player controls Tails, with a limited moveset though. The camera will only follow Sonic, so if Tails is off screen for too long, he automatically comes back. Along with that, he can only destroy enemies, collect rings, but not drop them, and damage bosses. I'm dubbing this form of co-op the Little Brother mode, since that's how most people have experienced it. This isn't very fun for the second player, but it tries to add an element of cooperation, mainly in boss fights. This style is reused in Sonic 3, where Tails can actually fly, in Sonic Adventure, only on the Dreamcast version, in Shadow the Hedgehog on any level that has an ally in it, and in Sonic Mania, where the second player can also be Knuckles partnered with anyone else. But in between those games, there were a few that stuck out with different forms of co-op gameplay. Like Knuckles' Chaotix, which solved 2 of the previous issues by making both players equal and always keeping them together. The game has 2 players connected by a power ring, which allows for crazy stuff like this.
Just go, I guess.
Ready, 1.
This ring.
Got it.
But it also makes it so the 2 players have to work together to go fast, climb up, or break the laws of physics. Instead of one player being a main and the second being a tool, both players are on equal ground, which makes co-op a lot more fair, but also really chaotic. The connected power rings also solve the camera issue because it centers on the 2 of them, so no one can go off screen. Overall, I think Knuckles Chaotix is one of the better examples of co-op in the series, but it pretty much requires the power ring to return in a new game, which I don't think is happening anytime soon. Sonic Advance 3 was the first game to have co-op on different screens. Each player chooses a character and the 2 play through the same level while being able to interact with each other through tag actions. It sounds pretty good, but it removes one important thing that Knuckles Chaotix had, the connection between the players. The 2 characters can stick together and use their tag actions, but since there's nothing physically connecting them, one player can just go and beat the level, leaving the other high and dry. Along with that, not every character moved at the same speed, so having Sonic and Knuckles start to run at the same time will eventually lead to them splitting up. This is the main reason why split screen always works better with versus in Sonic games, because it makes more sense to get as far away from the other character as possible. Surprisingly, there is one Sonic game that managed to use its 2 screens to its advantage. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric is a bad game for many reasons that we all know. But one great thing about its native console, the Wii U, is that one player can play on the TV while the other is on the gamepad, allowing each player to control a different character, but actually letting them work and stay together. This game has a larger focus on puzzle solving and exploration rather than speed, so the 2 players can have as much fun that can be found in this game without forcing one player to stay behind. From having each player on one screen to shoving them both on one, Sonic 4 Episode 2 is a strange bridge between them. Every version of this game allows you to play the full story, excluding Episode Metal, with a second player on a separate device. One player is designated as the lead, and each one chooses Sonic or Tails. The lead player can choose any level they have unlocked for the 2 to play through. It seems like another situation like Sonic Advance 3, but they tried, and mostly failed, to fix the problem of leaving a player behind. Both players are supposed to stick together, but if either one is too far off screen, they're put into an invulnerable state following the other player until pressing jump. This can get really annoying really quickly whenever you just want to go back to grab a few rings, but it's 10 times worse when you can't talk to each other. Just give up and disconnect. The funny thing about this solution is that it doesn't solve the problem at all, it just makes the extra player unable to die and still lets the main player beat the level. I think this strange solution comes from the fact that both the PC and console versions also allow local co-op. It seems like the devs thought they could kill both birds with one stone, but instead they gave them laser eyes? Where's this analogy going? Now that we've seen how they tried, but flopped with 2-screen co-op, let's see their attempts at 1-screen local co-op. I'm guessing most of you who've only played Project 06, like me, have never heard of Sonic 06's tag mode, but in it, each player chooses a Hedgehog and the 2 have to work together to get the Chaos Emerald from 7 different zones in the game. You could say that it's just Sonic Advance 3, but with half of a screen, but there are a few things that make this an improvement. Sonic 06 is generally a slower game compared to the other 3D, and especially 2D titles, which makes it easier to stick together. Another is that this game is pretty combat focused, so most objectives, that can't be glitched over, require both players to work together and defeat a bunch of enemies. 06's improvements were good, but primarily for 3D Sonic, but surprisingly, Sonic Colors managed to add a few things that made 2D co-op somewhat bearable. Colors had its multiplayer mode as a side world known as Gameland. Each player is a robot Sonic with the same moveset playing through these basic looking stage layouts. Now that's most of the downsides, but one great thing about this mode is that the camera is significantly zoomed out, which makes it easier to see both players. On top of that, the levels were just well designed with the intention to keep both players close to each other. Although when one player is too far off screen, it pauses the game for half a second before teleporting the player back soon after. It's a bit annoying, but it could be worse. Another thing that Colors did well was allow each player to homing attack each other. It seems like a downside because it temporarily stuns the other player, but it makes it so the players can really easily catch up to each other. I've never considered myself a fan of Sonic Colors Wii, but the Sonic Simulator probably had the best co-op at the time of the franchise. But from one of the best examples of co-op, we move on to the most hype, yet worst executed in the whole series, Sonic Superstars. If you haven't been conscious for the past year, when Sonic Superstars' announcement dropped, it showed off that you could play as Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy. Together! Every other trailer up to the game's release showed off the 4-player co-op mode, but the first controversy around it started when people learned that it was local co-op only. If Sonic Advance 3 was anything to go off of, this decision was for the best. Having 4 people play through the same stage at varying skill levels where they might not even be able to talk to each other just sounds like a disaster. And that's as far as the positives go for Superstars. It's pretty much the worst part of every game's co-op combined into one. The camera isn't zoomed out even though there's twice the amount of players. When someone is off screen, they just float until a button is pressed. Someone will end up being the lead, forcing everyone else to follow them, but then the camera can never decide who to follow. Speed Jungle 2 exists! If it wasn't obvious already, there are a lot of issues that make Superstars co-op really difficult to play. I mean, just watch any video of people playing with their friends. It's really chaotic, but honestly, I sometimes like to live in chaos. I'm not sure why, but it's really fun to watch a bunch of people who only half know what they're doing, trying not to die and press Factory Act 2. Like every mid-Sonic game, there's always fun to be found in it. But there's one game, one masterpiece, that has the untapped potential to create the best co-op in the series' history. Sonic Frontiers. And here's why. Sonic Frontiers is an open zone game where Sonic travels across the Starfall Islands trying to save his friend. After IGN posted 6 minutes of gameplay on Kronos Island, people were complaining about how open it was. Now obviously in hindsight, we can say that these complaints were unwarranted with all the platforming challenges and bosses to fight, but after doing all of that, the game really does feel empty. So what can fill this lonely hole in your heart? Sonic's friends?
No.
Online friends! Sonic Frontiers would work so well with online co-op because there's so much fun stuff you could do with your friends. Race across the island, beat up a boss, complete an overworld challenge, fight each other, or even the Titans together. Now obviously, this all sounds really cool, but is it realistic? Of course not! I'm assuming that it would be really difficult to have up to 4 people running around one person's world, and allowing them to interact and load way more of the island than usual. They'd have to get past the poppin' first. And if they get past those main issues and manage to add all of this in a sequel, I think it could be at least an IGN 9 out of 10. Okay, maybe I should stop dreaming and come back to reality. Not yet! Now imagine everything I just said, but in local co-op. 2 players, not 4. We've already learned that lesson. One thing that the same screen games can't fix is keeping players on the screen together, but also not too far apart. But I think there's one game that can solve the entire franchise's co-op camera problems. The LEGO Batman games. Now before you think that I've gone crazy, the dynamic camera mode in these games is amazing. The 2 are next to each other, and if they start getting further, the camera zooms out. But if they're too far apart, the screen divides, allowing each player to go wherever. The screen split shows which direction the other player is, so no one gets too lost from the other. Implementing this dynamic camera onto Sonic Frontiers would absolutely perfect the co-op mode. Now what about 2D Sonic co-op? It still has a lot of problems. How should it be fixed? I don't know. You guys just watched a whole video about why it's bad. So comment how you think it should work. Your guesses are as good as mine. I personally believe that Sonic Team will be able to make some good co-op someday, but maybe next time they should at least test it with 4 different people before hyping it up. Thanks for watching the video this far, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.